When we think about the great victories of the civil rights movement, our minds usually go to massive marches, to powerful speeches, right? But what if I told you that some of the most important battles weren't loud at all? They were quiet fights, won in places you'd never expect. Yeah, the fight for equality was about so much more than public spaces and transportation. It was also about something incredibly personal, something essential to life itself, healthcare. This was a battle for the basic right to get care, to be treated with dignity, to simply be well. And that's the big question we're tackling today. We're going to uncover the story of a landmark court case that quietly but completely began to reshape American medicine. And it's a case you've probably never even heard of. So let's get into it. Now, to really grasp how huge this case was, we first have to look at the system it was up against. A system that wasn't just unfair, it was deeply and legally unequal. And what's wild is just how normal this was. We are talking about hospitals with separate and almost always inferior wards for Black patients. Sometimes it was just a different door to walk through. But the resources, the quality of the care, even the basic access to a doctor, it was all decided by race. In many cases, hospitals would just flat out refuse to treat Black patients at all. It was literally a two-tiered system. For white patients, getting care was just an expectation. For Black patients, it was a hurdle, a system where their health was constantly at the mercy of prejudice. The injustice was built right into the very structure of American healthcare. So, how do you even begin to challenge a system that entrenched? Well, like so many massive changes, it didn't start with some grand strategic plan. It started with an ordinary person who just needed help. The whole chain of events started simply enough. A patient tried to get medical care. They were denied proper access, and the hospital blamed it on, quote, local rules, which was a pretty common excuse for segregation. But this time was different. Instead of just accepting it, the family decided to fight back. And just like that, a personal medical issue turned into a major legal challenge against the whole system. And with that one decision, the battle moved from the hospital ward right into the courthouse. This wasn't about just one patient anymore. This was about completely redefining what justice and equality even meant inside a hospital's walls. The legal argument was actually incredibly simple, and that's what made it so powerful. It basically boiled down to this. If a hospital gets public money, taxpayer money, then it has to serve the entire public equally. Denying someone access because of their race wasn't just wrong, it was a clear violation of their constitutional rights. So the trial became this fundamental clash of ideas. On one side, you had federal law and the Constitution, the principle that equality is a national promise. And on the other side, the defense of the status quo, based on local customs and traditions. It was a real showdown between national ideals and local prejudice. After all the arguments were made, the court finally reached a decision. But this victory, it wasn't shouted from the rooftops. In fact, its arrival was almost completely silent. Zero. That's how many front-page headlines this landmark decision got. A ruling that would start to tear down segregated healthcare across the country, and it happened with basically no media attention. It was a victory, for sure, but a silent one. But don't let the silence fool you. The impact was profound, even if it was gradual. You can think of this verdict as the first major crack in the dam. Segregated practices were now legally weak. Hospitals, especially any that took public money, were forced to start changing their policies. And step by step, hospital by hospital, equal access to healthcare slowly started to expand. So this brings us all the way back to our main question. If this case was so incredibly important, why has it been pretty much forgotten? And why should we make a point to remember it now? Well, looking back, the reasons are actually pretty clear. There were no mass protests, no famous civil rights leaders were involved, just an ordinary family and their lawyers. And not long after, huge laws like the Civil Rights Act of 1964 were passed, and they, understandably, got all the public's attention, leaving this quieter, earlier victory in the shadows. But here is why its legacy is so important. This forgotten case set a powerful precedent. It proved that the courtroom itself could be a frontline in the fight for civil rights. It showed that ordinary people, just by using the law, could challenge a deeply unjust system and actually win, creating a legal foundation that later movements would build on. It makes you think, doesn't it? We often look for justice in these big public gestures. But this story really challenges that idea. It makes us ask, where does real, lasting change actually start? And sometimes the answer is in a hospital hallway, or a lawyer's office, or a silent courtroom. It begins not with a roar, but with the quiet determination to simply demand what is right.